This is CIVE633, Environmental Hydrology. Today is Thursday, September 16th, and this is the second class of the fourth week of the semester. We are going to be covering several subjects that deal with environmental hydrology and the environment. The first subject I'm going to cover today, which I added yesterday because I thought as an afterthought that it was relevant for what we've been discussing, particularly in relation to the report by National Weather, I'm sorry, not National Weather Service, Fish and Wildlife Service that explained the interaction between the coastal rivers and the ocean. Okay. So what I have in here, I'm going to see if I can share the screen. Okay, do you see a blue screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. This one's not green, it's blue. Okay, what a bore. That's a good title. I came up with that title just to be a little catchy, you know. People have to get caught by surprise in order to get interested. In 1979, I went to the Pantanal of Mato Grosso. I talked about that extensively at the beginning of the class. And one of our associates out there, our counterparts actually, was Newton Carvalho, of whom I have talked extensively. Unfortunately, Newton left us a couple of years ago. Newton talked to me about the giant tidal bore of the Amazon. And 10 years later, I decided to go out there in search of the giant tidal bore, particularly since I should mention that I read the book by Cousteau, and he had mentioned it, but he did not photograph it. He did not take a picture of it. And I could not see a picture, so I said, I'm going to do this. So I went over there in 1989, 10 years after I found out about the issue or the phenomenon. And I went over in there and was successful in photographing the tidal bore. I did not take a video or make a video because at the time I was not doing that. But what's the issue? What we're going to discuss here? It's not just for the show of the tidal bore. The issue here is that this phenomena kind of reflects on what the counterpart or the opposite of what Hayami said in his paper. Hayami, those of you that have taken environmental or computational know about Hayami, have heard me talk about Hayami extensively. Hayami said that the waves are dissipated because of irregularities. In this case, there is a wave, and it's not dissipated. It is basically allowed to run over against the river flow for 20, 30 miles. So it's a very unusual phenomenon. It's not just in Brazil. It happens in France. It happens in other places. I believe in China also. China has one of the largest tidal bores in the world because it depends on the morphology, geomorphology of the surroundings, basically, because it has to do with the interaction of the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. You know, it's tidal. So in this case, we were able to document this phenomenon as it appeared. It was at 8 o'clock on, I can't recall the date right now, but it is here. But what I want to point out in here is that we said something that is correct in my opinion. That we said that these tidal bores are going to form in situations where there's a large estuary, there's a large tidal range, and also there is very smooth river bottom. The river bottom's got to be smooth, like a rectangle, so that there will be no irregularities and the bore can progress upstream against the flow. So that's the finding. I would like you to read this paper because it's a good paper to read in regards to this. And I have photos in here in color for you to see what we recorded over there. That's the tidal bore. At this place, it's only covering, how interesting, it's only covering about 2/3 of the width of the river. I'm given to understand that that's the part that was smooth. The other part wasn't, so it couldn't develop there. Over here, you can see the tidal bore again. How big is this tidal bore? Now, this particular one, I estimate it to be about a meter and a half, so it's about 5 feet. But tidal bores have been known to be much larger in various places around the world. The Chinese have documented a tidal bore, if I recall correctly, about 8 meters or something like that. But that doesn't happen very often. I believe, I think I repeat it and I'll repeat it again. I'm going to get you guys tired. I was lucky that I had a gentleman from China many years ago, like 25, 30 years ago. And when I showed him this report, he says, oh, in China we have had an event in the 1600s recorded, because I guess the Chinese record a lot of stuff. They have a lot of history. Where there was this tidal bore, I believe it was 9, now I remember correctly. It was 9 meters, 9.03 meters, recorded at some place out there, some estuary in China, which is purported to be the largest tidal bore recorded in the world. So that's what I'm going to say about this subject on the tidal bores. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into B10, which is the subject. The subject is, will the Amazon rainforest help in taking out excess carbon from the air? I should give credit to Professor Welch from University of Washington, who was employed by the Civil Engineering Department in the 80s. When the Civil Engineering Department at University of Washington decided that they were going to get into the environment, they hired an ecologist to teach the civil engineers what ecology was all about, which is the way to do it, obviously. So Welch was hired in the Civil Engineering Department, and he wrote a book after a few years, of course, of teaching. He wrote a book which I read, and we actually have the Welch book here, C1, C2, C3. We have part of the Welch book in our syllabus. So Welch illustrated for us the concepts of ecology, and therefore later on I was able to write this contribution, which, by the way, we eventually did a video on it. If we have time, I'll show the video. Otherwise, you're welcome to see the video later on. It says watch in YouTube, meaning you can watch this entire thing in YouTube. Okay, so the question is, will the Amazon rainforest help in taking up excess carbon from the air? The Amazon rainforest has a lot of carbon. It's the most extensive rainforest ecosystem in the world. These ecosystems collect and hold carbon. Carbon is organic matter, vegetation, right? Nobody disagrees the Amazon has a lot of carbon, contains a lot of carbon. So that has led some people to say or to argue that we should leave the Amazon rainforest alone so that it can take the carbon that is being produced by industry around the world. Developed industry around the world is producing, or has produced in the past, a lot of carbon. It's still producing, although there are some restrictions to it now because of the global warming issue. But argument still remains we should not mess with the Amazon because it's going to help us eventually, or it has been helping us. Now, according to Welch, that is a fallacy, because while the Amazon takes a lot of carbon, it also releases a lot of carbon. In climax communities like the Amazon, we talked about climax already. In climax communities like the Amazon, the amount of the famous equation of life, of nature, photosynthesis vis-a-vis respiration, they are balanced. So whatever you have in photosynthesis, you also have in respiration. So therefore, there's no net accumulation. What does that mean? Or how does we explain that in layperson terms? It means that while the plants are absorbing carbon, the animals out there are releasing carbon. And there are as many animals, there's a whole lot of animals in the Amazon. And there's a very well-developed trophic chain, food chain, trophic chain or food chain. And you guys know what that means. Everybody's eating everybody out there. That is one of the major reasons why the Amazon basin is largely unpopulated, not populated by humans. because we can't compete with the elements. We cannot compete with the bugs. The people that are living out there, there are some people living out there. Brazil can count on about 600,000, I think is. I could be wrong on the figure. 600,000 native population. Native meaning pre-Columbian population, Indians, so to speak. Well, not real Indians, but natives. Let's say natives is the right word. And spread throughout the Amazon. And but there's not a whole lot, because Brazil has a population of around the 200 million. 200 million population in large cities and so forth. So you can see, everybody knows the Amazon, you can Google population density in the Amazon, there's hardly anything. Because human beings of our kind, not natives, but of our kind, have a hard time being out there. The Brazilians are trying to defeat that argument. Let's go to the Amazon, let's populate the Amazon, let's develop the Amazon. But in my opinion, they're going to fail. They have failed already several times, but the politicians keep insisting that that's the way they should do it. They have a gentleman over there who is the president who insisted they're going to do it. They're going to extract the riches of the Amazon. Basically, if they change the Amazon, they're going to change the hydrology. The first thing they're going to change is the hydrology. So instead of having 100 floods, they're going to have 300 and stronger and much larger. They're going to destroy themselves eventually. Okay, that has happened all over the place. Okay, we can indeed change the hydrology. There's an example of the Paraná River in Brazil where engineers, well, not engineers, Brazilian society changed the hydrology, and they had something else. And I'll tell that story later on at some other time. We don't have time right now. So let's go ahead. Through photosynthesis, all forests take carbon dioxide from the air and incorporate the carbon into organic matter. Tropical rainforests such as the Amazon, great quantities of carbon are fixed daily into cellulose, lignines, and other natural compounds. This fact has encouraged the argument that the preservation of the Amazon will ensure the removal of the excess carbon that has accumulated in the atmosphere over the past 50 years, more or less, due to the burning of fossil fuels. At issue is the carbon entering the forest, the daily production of vegetative matter, not the carbon matter stored in the tree stands through millennia. So they're talking about the fluxes. And if there's a flux going in and a flux coming out, if you don't consider the one coming out, then you're only talking about half of the equation. So there is a balance. I believe Welch does say there is a balance, and I do believe there's a balance. We have ample expertise and experience to say that. Obviously we haven't measured it. It would be almost impossible to measure. We just have a sense that there is a balance. It can be measured, by the way. It's just that people haven't thought that that was a very important subject. I know that, for instance, there's a gentleman here at San Diego State, professor whose name I don't remember at this point, who has done over the last 20 years a lot of carbon measurements in Canada, in the Northern Hemisphere. So if he can do carbon measurements, carbon in general, carbon, right? In other words, taking a stab at what is the balance between photosynthesis and respiration. As you guys know, that's ecology. It can be done, but to my knowledge, it has not been done in Brazil to settle the issue that Welch argued in his book. Okay, Welch argued because he knows his ecology, and he knows when a system is in climax, then it is a balance, because that's why they call it a climax, a balance. Okay, so the fallacy of this argument is apparent when it is recognized that photosynthesis does not act alone. We already know that. In tropical rainforests, gross production and respiration take place at about the same rate. In many cases, the amount of respiration is very close to that of gross production, resulting in net production very close to zero. The high rates of respiration are a result of well-developed food chains, which promote efficient biodegradation. And here, I cannot help but tell you a story. I read a book a long time ago, like maybe 30 years ago. It was a novel, actually. No, it was not a novel. I usually don't read novels. It's a factual fiction book about two gentlemen from Australia who went to the Amazon. They were adventurers. They went to the Amazon with the intent of navigating the Trombetas River, that is a tributary of the Amazon, upstream. Only that the Trombetas River has about 90 falls. So, and if you're going to go in a canoe over the falls upstream, that's pretty tough. If you go downstream, well, maybe you can make it, but at the upstream, you got to be tough. These guys were tough, and they decided to do it. We're going to navigate the trombetas upstream through the falls in a canoe. Just two people. And they did it. But unfortunately, one of them perished in the process. This is a fascinating book, by the way. It's called Up the Creek, which I have it if you're interested in reading something different over the weekend and so forth. I can give you the full reference. You can buy it off Amazon. This is a fascinating book. At any rate, one of the gentlemen died. And the other guy went to get some help to do something about it. You carry the guy out to some other place, bury him, and so forth. Well, he left, and he came back a couple of days later. To his amazement and surprise, the body wasn't there. What happened? I don't know what happened, but I speculate that something that you guys know happened. He was eaten by the elements, and the elements are a lot. There's a whole lot of stuff out there. The Amazon rainforest, people like to visit the Amazon rainforest. Oh, I like to go visit the Amazon, people say about that. Well, I submit that they wouldn't last more than 3 days or even a week. Once they see the Amazon, they have an intense urgency to get out. Why? Because there are too many bugs out there. We don't like the bugs. The bugs will always beat us. They're small and too many, right? So this issue of the Amazon is nice, but it has to be taken with a grain of salt. So the soils of the Amazon have been leached heavily through millennia by abundant rainfall, and they are therefore generally poor in nutrients. In the Amazon, you can only grow a few things. You can grow nuts, but you cannot grow potatoes. You can't grow corn. You cannot grow the basic staples that society uses nowadays. The only thing that grows well out there is the yucca. I don't know if you how do you call it? One of the typical plant or typical product of the Amazon. And there's a few others, like fruits. The fruits of the Amazon are different, totally different. And they're only grow in the Amazon because you have to have a choice of nutrients in order to do that. So, so it would be a failure to replace the Amazon rainforest with grasslands because simply the nutrients are not going to be there. Well, if somebody, developmental guy says, oh, forget about it, Professor Ponce, you're nuts. We are going to put in there fertilizers. Sure, you can put agronomy is advanced at this point where you know exactly what every plant needs, and you can put the fertilizers in there. So you can go ahead and put the fertilizers, fertilize the land in order to grow some crop. Unfortunately, the Amazon has a way of raining every afternoon. So the morning you apply the fertilizer, the afternoon they're washed into the river. You can't control it. What are you going to do? And once they're washed into the river, they end up enriching the river and causing eutrophication. That is a well-known fact. A river that has too many nutrients, a river can have a certain amount of nutrients, but not too many. If it has too many, it'll start clogging itself up, and it'd be more trouble than what we really want. These studies, for instance, have been made extensively. One of the major, or rather beginning studies of eutrophication was made in Seattle, the United States, many years ago. The people from Seattle were dumping their sewage into the ocean, but it was not the ocean, it was a bay. I don't recall the name right now. And the stuff was staying in the bay. It was not circulating because of lack of circulation and so forth. So they had to do something about it. That stuff is not just there, it happens all over the world. When you dump sewage into the ocean, it's not an open ocean, it will not leave. It will stay around, and it will cause trouble, cause eutrophication. Okay, so now I tied in here my or the fact that Welch talked about this issue with an observation that I have over the years. In MySCR, basically, you guys, those of you that taken computational hydrology have heard about MySCR. MySCR basically says that there's 3 types of waves. The waves, the big waves on the left, the small waves on the right, and the waves in the middle, which are the intermediate size waves. And typically in nature, that's the way it always happens. There is a left, a middle, and a right. And that's exactly what happens in here. So that's why I brought the analogy. And we say in here, the analogy is very correct. over the middle of the precipitation spectrum at an average terrestrial value close to 800, is net production likely to be at its peak, just like wave attenuation is at its peak in the middle of the wave number spectrum. In other words, I justified, or rather explained, the issue of the Amazon rainforest and the deserts being unable to have net production. In the Amazon rainforest, a lot of photosynthesis, a lot of respiration, no net production. In the deserts, hardly any photosynthesis, hardly any respiration. There's no bugs in the desert, no net production. So the only place where you can have net production is in the middle, which happens to be the 800 millimeter isoyhet. I already talked about that. In other words, the region where it rains 800 millimeters is where you can, the forests in the 800 millimeters are the ones that are likely. Well, I mean, take this with a grain of salt. It could be 800, 900, 1,000, maybe up to 1,200, but not 16 or 2,000. That's be too much already. And not 4 or 200. That's too little. That is too little. Examples of 200, San Diego. San Diego has 250 on the coast and 500 in the inland. It's arid and semi-arid. It gets a little bit into semi-arid, but it's not the 800 millimeters. Don't have enough water. If you want more water, all you need to do is go to San Francisco. San Francisco has an 800 millimeter isoyhet. You can find these 800 millimeters isoyhet throughout the United States. San Antonio, for instance, has 800 millimeters. You know Texas. Texas varies all the way from the next to Louisiana, where it's extremely wet, to next to New Mexico, where it's extremely dry. Texas is a large state, and it goes east-west, right? So it has that east-west effect on the weather, because you know the more you approach the western United States, the drier it gets. It gets to Colorado and so forth, because that's just the way nature put things together. Don't forget that in order for it to rain, there has to be 8 things that happen. They could happen all of them, or one of them, or 2 of them, or 3. And I've already discuss that, and I'm going to put it on your reading material, because I talked about that in hydrology, raining. I'm going to write it down. Rain factors. I'm going to post it for you, okay? So you can see it, because I already talked about it, and I have not shown it to you. Okay, so with this S-curve, I justify the issues that we're discussing in here. So epilogue, that's the end. The utility of the rainforest is not in helping to remove the contemporary industrial carbon from the air. Its value is intrinsic, to preserve natural ecosystems, to regulate floods, and to condition the mesoscale weather, admittedly among some of its most important roles. Thus, every effort should be made to preserve the rainforest for posterity. I don't know if the Brazilians are going to do it. That depends on who they elect as president. You know that president has a lot of power, okay? I positively know that the Peruvians, Venezuelans, and Colombians are not going to touch it. I don't know why, but they're not going to touch it. I think the reason is, I can share this with you, that the Brazilian people are kind of oriented or tuned into the so-called progress, okay? So they say, we're going to progress, we're going to get rid of the Amazon, it's no good for nothing, and that's why they do it. While the other countries don't do that, by the way. The other countries, particularly Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela, they're not into this progress thing, and they're not going to touch the Amazon. I can guarantee that for you. I'm from there. I know what I'm talking. They're not going to touch the Amazon. Nobody's saying at this point in Peru, let's go to the Amazon and get rid of it. Nobody. As a matter of fact, they're saying exactly the opposite. Okay, so these are arguments and concepts that are somehow hard to swallow, but they are correct. Okay, so I'm not going to show the video because we're running out of time here, but I ask you to visit the video because it is the same subject, only repetition. You know, repetition is good. So now we're going to go to the third paper in here. The 800 millimeter isoyhet, health and hope. Okay, when we do work, when we do this kind of work, by the way, this kind of work is not, by the way, it's not paid by anybody. If I actually ever wrote a proposal, I wouldn't get the money. These are subjects that need to be explored, need to be clarified. but they're not research subjects per se. Besides, I'm not an ecologist, and this is ecology. The first thing they will ask me is, are you an ecologist? Which, by the way, that happened already with me. Remember I told you one time I submitted a wetland proposal to National Science, and I had forgotten to mention the redox potential. And they killed me. They said, how are you going to do a study without studying redox potential? I said, oh, that's true. Thank you. You know, that was at the end of it. But the 800 millimeter isoyhet in the Amazon rainforest, I had Newton Carvalho who taught me about this. He said, Ponce, there is this phenomena, which is an interesting phenomena. Very few countries in the world, but we have it in Brazil repeatedly. I can tell you exactly when it's going to happen. The Navy knows when it's going to happen because they know the movement of the star, not the stars, I'm sorry, the movement of the Earth as opposed to the moon and so forth. They have studied the tides and they know exactly when this thing is going to happen. It usually happens in the 21 of March and the 21 of September, which, as you know, is geographically, those are important dates. So I told Newton, I said, unfortunately, I cannot go the 21 of March or September because I'm teaching. He said, hey, don't worry about it. They also have it on the 21 of February and 21 of January, albeit a little less intense. I said, cool, I'm going to go. So I was there the 21st of January of the year 1989. I believe it was 21 or 22. 21. Okay. So many years ago, I was invited to Tijuana, and we were going to do some work out there. It was a demonstration of something that a friend of mine, I have a few friends in Tijuana, had done a project. And I was there talking to this architect who was there visiting also the project. And I was talking to him, and I mentioned the 800 millimeter isoyhet. I said, you know, we're talking about this 800 millimeter isoyhet, and he's of course an architect. An architect doesn't know anything about the isoyhet. That's a hydrologic issue, which engineers like us know. Okay, and he says, what is this isoyhet stuff? I said, oh. I realized at the point that I should have come down a little bit because, you know, he was an architect. Architects do different things, but they don't do that. And I said, you know what, John? John, I say John for saying anything. Do you know what, John? I do not believe I really covered that stuff. I'm going to do it. In other words, I was talking out of knowledge, but not out of having recorded anything or having studied anything seriously, because I wasn't funded to do this. So that night I said, you know what, I'm going to write this paper because it needs to be written. I have a lot of stuff, a lot of good information. I can resort to all kinds of a lot of references that discuss this issue on the side, not centrally, but I was going to do it centrally. So I wrote this paper in June 2012. That's exactly the date it was. It was in 2012. So it's 9 years ago. So now you and I are going to go over this paper with a fine-tooth comb because it is a fundamental issue of environmental hydrology. If you understand this, you'll understand half of it, okay? So we're going to spend a lot of time on this today. Living matter is made out of three major elements: hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Organic matter is CH2O. These constitute more than 98% by weight of all living matter. People disagree as to exactly what is 98 or 95 or 96. I quote Devi, Mineral Cycle, Scientific American. That's the Bible, not to be disrespectful, but Devi is a very good paper, which I already recommended that you guys read. Three other elements, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, are regarded as the leading nutrients. So the acronym is NCHOPS, due to their importance in life processes. Among the remaining nutrients are sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium. Those are the four salt cations, which occur in large proportions in rocks in nature. We actually have documented this, and I have another paper later on that we'll read extensively or in much detail. So sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium. And right after that come the other minerals that are necessary to support life. In very minute amounts or trace amounts, we have iron, zinc, aluminum, boron, chloride, chromium, cobalt, copper, fluoride, manganese, molybdenum, and selenium. Those are listed by Debbie in his paper, okay? Besides these, there's 20 others that are less important that were not listed by Debbie. So I figured that's enough, okay? Selenium in parts per billion is a nutrient, and in parts per million is toxic. It can kill you. That's well-known fact, okay? Animals, including humans, need a tiny bit of selenium. Otherwise, Debbie would not have put it in here. Selenium is an interesting thing. And I said in the past that the nutrients that we have at our disposal, well, not now. I mean, the world is totally confounded by transportation, meaning if we don't have the selenium here, we can buy it from Singapore or whatever, from any other place. It can be bought. But without buying it and transporting it, you would have to use whatever selenium is there if you needed it, or for that matter, fluoride, iron, etc., right? And California is blessed with a lot of selenium. How interesting. Like I already told you, selenium in parts per billion is a nutrient, in parts per million is toxic. I happen to know that because I've done work in the Central Valley. And the Central Valley has the drainage from the Sierras, and the Sierras are full of selenium. Architecture of the biosphere requires specific quantities of these nutrients. That's true. The quantities vary with the type of organism. Every organism, be it an apple, an orange, whatever it is, a dog, whatever, any living entity requires a certain type of nutrients. Why is it that a potato is not a corn? Because there was a seed out there, and Mother Nature decided to put a corn together and pulled out of the environment the necessary elements to put the corn together. That's the way it works, okay? Therefore, in order to grow, plants must produce oxygen as a byproduct. Okay, no, let me hear. Plants obtain their carbon and oxygen from the air and their hydrogen from water in the surrounding environment. This is interesting. We're going to read a paper later on where there are 5 or 6 sources of water for the plants. 5 or 6, not just one, not just rain. Rain is one of them, but there's others. Okay, we'll get there. Extra oxygen molecule in water is released to the air. Therefore, in order to grow, plants must produce oxygen. Plants get the nutrients they need from the surrounding soil, and increasingly in developed societies by artificial fertilization. Thus, but that's kind of dangerous. It's not easy. Like I said, there's a drawback. There's always a plus and a minus. Thus, plants require the following inputs: solar energy, which is there, free, depending on the latitude, right? Like in 90 degrees, you don't get any solar, any energy, and therefore that's why you have the ice, very cold out there, and plants typically don't grow. They're normal plants. Every plant has a habitat and a range of acceptable temperature, etc. All the parameters, everything, pH, PE, etc. Okay, solar energy, carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. Those are the 4. So I repeat, solar energy out there, carbon dioxide in the air, water in the environment, nutrients in the soil. Limiting factors. The supply of solar energy varies with latitude. Yes, that's true. I already told you. Plants in tropical and temperate regions are able to get their energy during the day or during the growing season. Remember the killing curve, where the red curve of the concentration of carbon dioxide goes up like a sinusoid, almost exactly like a sinusoid. Why exactly like a sinusoid? Because the Earth is almost a perfect sphere, and it rotates. It's not quite a sphere, but it's almost a perfect sphere, and it rotates and it produces a sinusoid. Carbon dioxide exists in the air in concentrations that are sufficient for plants to avail themselves as much carbon dioxide as needed. The Scientific American people say that the global warming would be worse if it weren't for the fact that the vegetation is helping and the sea is helping. The problem is that when the vegetation helps, that's not too much of a problem. Well, but the sea helps, that is a problem. Because then you have more carbon dioxide going into the sea, and there's going to cause a lot of havoc, a lot of trouble. And one of you have chosen that theme, by the way. And by the way, I remind you that this is the end of the 4th week, and we have until the beginning of the 6th week to choose a topic, and I do believe not all of you have already chosen the topic. So you can talk to me at any time if you wanted to discuss the choosing of this or that topic, but it's got to be done by Monday. That's 10 days from now. Therefore, the limiting factors are always water and nutrients. Sun, we have. If we don't have sun, well, we'll move to where the sun is. But the water and nutrients are the limiting factors. In some places, there is very little water. And in some places, there's very little nutrients. Here, in the Sahara Desert, there's very little water. All deserts have very little water. There's deserts all over. Well, not all. Some countries don't have deserts. Um, the, um, the Sahara Desert, California has the Dead Valley. I'm sure you guys maybe have been to Dead Valley. It's a desert. On the other hand, there is the Amazon rainforest. This is a very good picture of the Amazon rainforest. We don't, in the conterminous United States, we don't have rainforests. The wetter forests that we have are in California, 4,800 millimeters. So you can convert that to inches. 4,800 millimeters. The Amazon is 3,200 millimeters. So the water in the corner, in the northwest corner of California, has 1.5 times more water than the Amazon. How fascinating. We didn't know that, but it is the fact. 4,800 as opposed to 3,200. It shows in the size of the trees. The Amazon rainforest has the canopy of the Amazon rainforest is about 60 meters, while that in California is 80 meters. That should tell us that there's something going on in there. There's more water in that corner of California than in the Amazon. That's it. But they're not the only ones, or not the major ones. Out in Cherrapunji in India, it rains 12,000, I'm sorry. So you go from 3,200 to 4,800 to 12,000. I have not been there. I at one time was supposed to get out there and never got out there. Never got out there. Luck was against me at that time. What happened was that there was a lot of political issues out there. They weren't letting any foreigners get in. And I was definitely a foreigner. So I said, heck with it. It'll be some other time. But I would have loved to go out there because that's where green hell, that is 12,000 millimeters, that Cherrapunji, it's called Assam. It's a state of India that is right next in the vicinity of what used to be called Burma. I think now it's called something else. I mean, I don't remember the name right now. Well, let's go. Let's forget about it. It used to be called Burma. Then they changed their name 20, 30 years ago, the name. Recently, they have political problems and so forth. Anyway, okay, so water is limited in regions with little or no rain. That's true. Nutrients are limited in regions with too much rain. In other words, in the Amazon, there's no nutrients. In the Sahara, there's nutrients, but there's no water. So here's the issue here, dichotomy, that if you don't have any water, you have a lot of nutrients. And if you don't have any nutrients, you have a lot of water. That's a fact. Throughout geologic time, enough rainfall has percolated in the humid regions. They washed the nutrients out into neighboring streams and rivers, and these nutrients eventually made it into the ocean a long time ago. This process is referred to the leaching of the nutrients. In arid regions, the soils are relatively unspoiled and typically rich in nutrients because leaching has not had a chance to take place. That is correct. Do we have arid regions in the United States? Yes. We have the western United States, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada is totally arid, okay? In California, half of California is arid. The other half, Northern California, because of the latitude, is not arid anymore. The good thing about California is we have everything. Well, we don't have rainforests, but we have forests, very good forests. They're in the dichotomy. In arid regions, there are plenty of nutrients, but not enough water. In humid regions, there are plenty of water, but not enough nutrients. That's a fact. At the extremes of the climatic, we can fix that, by the way, but it will be at a cost. I already told you, there's a cost in there. If it's not natural, it is at a cost, okay? At the extreme of the climatic spectrum, regions where mean annual precipitation is less than 100 are referred to as super arid. Regions where mean annual precipitation greater than 6,400 are referred to as super humid. In super arid regions, life is hard because there's very little water. In super humid regions, life is hard, particularly for humans, because most of the nutrients have already been leached out of the soil. If we would need the nutrients to put the food together, there's not going to be food out there. The diversity of food will be decreased. And that has an effect on just about everything, by the way. And I'm going to say something that is harsh, but it needs to be said. When people are poorly fed without a diversity of nutrients, it shows up in their physical ability, their intelligence, and so on and so forth. That is also a fact, but well, it's not a fact, but it can be demonstrated. So diversity is important, and we have diversity certainly here. I mean, in order to get diversity, you got to get food from all kinds of places, different kinds of places. Or you should be also at the 800 millimeters. If you're at the 800 millimeter, naturally you're going to get diversity. But if you're not at 800 millimeters, you are at 400 or 2000, you're going to have to wrestle and get the diversity through nowadays through transportation. Don't forget that 200 years ago, we didn't have transportation, or we have very little transportation. So I'm talking about as opposed to what we could do now with transportation, as opposed to what we could have, we could do 200-300 years ago when there was no transportation. There were very little transportation. After we had trucks and stuff only 100 years ago, then we started to transport everything. Ships, to planes. We can get grapes from Chile right now here by plane. Isn't that amazing? Okay. The good grapes. I'm not going to say anything about that, but I mean, that's a fact. Transportation has changed the way we see and we do things. Okay. Over the past century, humans have endeavored to challenge nature design by irrigating arid lands. We did that. That is, moving water great distances to irrigate the deserts, thereby making them productive. So the idea was that if there's no water in the desert, let's bring water to the desert. That was good. That was a good plan. But it missed the point. And I'm going to say here, what point did they miss? That was 100 years ago, 120 years ago. The irrigation in the Salton Sea began 120 years ago. The irrigation in California began in 1903. That's a whole story that we don't have time to cover today. Well, basically, what happened was that the people in California protested to Washington, saying in the year 1900 that if the federal government didn't support them, they were going to go back to wherever they came from, Illinois, Tennessee, and stuff like that. And the federal government decided at that time that they would not be able to allow that, because then the country was going to come to pieces, right? People going back to where they came from and not settling and making the land productive and stuff, and the economies and so forth. So they decided to help them out, and they created the Bureau of Reclamation, 1903. Who created the Bureau of Reclamation? It was signed as law by Teddy Roosevelt at the time. Teddy Roosevelt is regarded or recorded as the president that signed the creation of the Bureau of Reclamation. Bureau of Reclamation is an interesting name, Bureau to reclaim. Well, it's actually to reclaim Western lands. The Bureau only has jurisdiction over 11 Western United States. Although the other day I saw, I think that says 15. I'm not sure it's 11. I always thought it was 11. But anyway, you can name all the 11 Western United States. That's the Bureau of Reclamation. They've done an excellent job, tunnel vision, but an excellent job of doing what they were called upon to do, which is reclaim Western lands for agriculture and irrigation. But there's something in there that they forgot, and that's what we're going to cover here today. Okay? Deserts have a store of nutrients, and all that's required to start using those nutrients is to add imported water to the soil. So you go to the desert in there, you bring the water from afar, like we have here in California, in Arizona, in Utah, and you fixed it. You're producing stuff, right? Unfortunately, and this is where the issue comes, that the packages of nutrients in the soil are brand new. They haven't been used, okay? And they're packaged. They have like a piece of chocolate. A piece of chocolate has a chocolate inside and the wrapping outside. And you're not going to eat the wrapping. The wrapping is just delivered to you. So they delivered, nature delivered the nutrients to irrigators, to the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, in the package. So by the time they get the good nutrients out, which are, the good nutrients I already listed them, they had to throw away the package. And the packaging in the package is sodium chloride and calcium sulfate, because they occur in large quantities and they are not they're not necessary, right? So the question is, where do you dispose of that trash? It's trash. If you're next to the ocean, you can do it. Just dump it in the ocean. But if you're far from the ocean, you cannot do it. And that is the problem of the Salton Sea. For 120 years, they have been creating all this trash and they don't know where to put it. So they applied and got a depression right next to the Imperial Valley to dump the trash and been doing that for 120 years. And there's no stopping them. There's no way to stop them. The only way to stop them is for somebody to say, you guys are not going to do this anymore. And that, of course, is impossible politically impossible. Okay? So we at this point don't know what to do with the Salton Sea. And there's another story which I will come back to discuss in more detail later on. Superhuman, and the Salton Sea is not the only one, by the way. The Central Valley has the same problem, albeit not so crucial or not so obvious, but they have the same problem. Why? Because the Central Valley drains into San Francisco Bay, while the Salton Sea doesn't drain anywhere. So the Salton Sea accumulates while the Central Valley is draining, and people are forgetting that that stuff is being thrown into San Francisco Bay in small quantities, of course. It doesn't have a chance to accumulate. While in the Imperial Valley's Salton Sea has accumulated over the last 120 years. Okay, so that's the way the Amazon, if you're interested, that's the way the Amazon looks. You can fly over the Amazon for 4 or 5 hours, all the way from Venezuela to northern to Bolivia. 3 or 4 or 5 hours. I've done that a few times. Quandary of civilization, how to cope with the national distribution of water. By all accounts, the import of water into arid regions solves the problem, but this is necessarily at the cost of creating a problem of salt disposal. In effect, the two major salts, calcium and sodium, are produced from soils in greater quantities than needed by the artificial ecosystems, and they end up polluting neighborhood water courses in the case of open drainage systems, or inland lakes in the case of closed drainage systems, in the case of the Salton Sea. Too little precipitation leads to too little water and too many nutrients. Conversely, too much precipitation leads to too much water and too few nutrients. It follows that there must be a happy medium where the supply of water and nutrients are optimal. That is, just enough water for life's needs, sufficient amount of good nutrients, and comparatively few surplus nutrients requiring disposal. So that's what led us to believe or to create this idea of this concept of the mean annual global terrestrial precipitation, which had to be calculated. And we were doing hydrology at the time, and we studied the work of the Russians that published a 1978 report called the Global Water Balance, where they and Leibovich also identified 800 millimeters. There's various people that have done this calculation. I believe Leibovich came up with 900. Others came up with 850. I came up with 830. And I figured I'm not going to fuss about this. Let's call it 800, because 800 is a round number. It's a Kabbalistic number, meaning a good number. People can relate to it because it's 3 times, or rather, the cube power of 2, 2, 4, 8, 16, right? So it's a good number. Thus, the region with 800 millimeters ought to be in natural balance, theoretically with no pressing need for extra water or nutrients. If subsidies means extra energy, then if energy expenditures translate into an augmented carbon footprint, right, if you're going to use extra energy to do something, you better make sure that from now on it's not fossil. Otherwise, it will backfire, right? It could be solar or whatever, but not fossil. Readily seen that the 800 millimeter isoyhet adheres to the principle of sustainability. We should do everything possible to become sustainable from now into the future. The conclusion is the 800 millimeter is a region where life, particularly human life, would find itself in its most comfortable and secure position. I was in India, when was it? 1998, I think, was the last time. I was 5 times in India. And I visited the Indus Basin. And the Indus Basin has a lot of irrigation. They have no problem. I was surprised. I said, oh, that's cool. Where's the salt? Salt? We don't have any salt here. I looked at it, and the Indus Basin, in the place where they have the central region of India, is 800 millimeters. What about that? So they have very little salt. I'm sure they have salt, but very little. Not the amount of salt that they have that we have in the Salton Sea. You see how things happen? The people that developed the Salton Sea saw in the 1900, exactly 1900, they saw the expanse of the Colorado Desert, and they said, let's bring the water from the Colorado, and we'll irrigate this, and we'll make money. And so they did. One of the reports that I read is that I could be wrong on this. Sometimes I say things that are not factual because they're outdated. But I do believe firmly that the people that are irrigating out there in the Salton Sea, they have large farms and they are rich because they have large farms. I have actually a friend out there that has 2,000 acres. 2,000 acres of good irrigated farm is a lot of money to produce, right? So that's basically it. The people are making money, but at the expense of the Salton Sea. Okay, so to reiterate, humid regions leach soils excessively and arid regions conserve nutrients. Then the 800 millimeter region must be an optimum balance between water and nutrients. And 800 millimeters should be taken with a grain of salt. I would say from 600 to 1200. I mean, don't take me exactly. But 800 is the central, the fulcrum, so to speak, the central of the whole thing. 800 millimeters, San Francisco. San Francisco is 800 millimeters. More above San Francisco, it gets to almost to about 3,000. You get to Eureka, you probably range 3,000. You get to the corner, west corner, 4,800, right? But you get to Death Valley, zero. San Diego, 250 millimeters, and it varies. It's very important, very important. In other places around the United States, like I told you, in the middle of Texas is the 800 millimeters, because East Texas maybe 2,000, West Texas maybe 200, 300, as it approaches New Mexico. New Mexico is around there. Nevada is very, very dry. That's the reason why Nevada was able to cash on the casino business, because they basically don't have much to show as a state in terms of productivity. Besides, Nevada is full of salt. Have you ever flown? You take a Google Earth flight over Nevada. You'll see that 30% of the area is white. White. We know that that's salt. Okay. Okay. At any rate, outlook: plentiful supply of diverse nutrients is apt to enhance biotic potential. What is biotic potential? Biotic potential is people being able to survive and thrive in this life. Those that cannot survive and don't thrive don't have biotic potential, both mental as well as physical. Barring external subsidies, and here is important, barring external subsidies, our societies are fully subsidized on every issue. If we did not have the subsidies, we would be in real trouble because we couldn't do it. The 800 millimeter isoyhet is well where life, particularly for humans, is likely to be optimal. Therefore, it is there where health and hope, essential to body and soul. So health is essential to body, and hope is essential to soul. So hope, or rather, hope is the food of the mind, and health, the food of the body is the body, the food that we have. Essential to body ought to be most naturally at their peak. I already told you, the Indians are 1.4 billion in a very small, relatively small area, about a third of the United States, I think. They have 5 times the population in a third of the United States, so the density is about 15. Okay, China is a lot bigger than India. And they're able to survive, and they survive and thrive. I've been to India many times. I like it over there. Even though it's not the United States, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, it's a different story. Okay, one of our colleagues one day said, when I talked about India in a nice way, he confided to some other person, which then confided to me, so I got to know that he said something like this: well, Professor Ponce likes India. Maybe it's because he's from Peru. Well, okay, fine, I can take that. But the point is that you got to have a different kind of view in order to see the good things in those areas. Okay, there's a lot of good things out there. So finally, we review this, and I want you to. There is a video on this, but it's an old video, so I am not going to be unhappy if you don't see it. My plan is to produce a new video in the future, in the near future, maybe in the next 6 months, because that stuff's important. It was produced in the year 2009, I believe, or 2010, and like I already told you the other day, our improvement, we have improved in the production of videos in quality, quantity, and everything. We need to produce another video of the 800 millimeter isoyhet. Okay. And finally, the B13 is the plants and animals, how many are they? See, this is where I want you guys to hold on to your seats, because some of the things I'm going to say are harsh, or not harsh, hard to swallow. Okay? But before that, I am going to I am going to discuss this issue, the global warming puzzle. How many people does a car amount to? So I already said in in the work that we've been doing here with Fish and Wildlife Service that respiration by humans and combustion is the same in respiration. We combust our food by and then breathe, respire. All the animals do that. All the breathing animals do that. So respiration is part of the ecosystem, part of nature. But respiration is the same as combustion. So do we have entities around here that are not respiring, but they're combusting? And the answer is, of course, we got a whole lot of them. Every automobile is like that. And there's about 1.2 billion at last count. I think that's a couple years old. As people said that every year they add about 100,000, 100 million, 100 million. So I don't know. It's very easy. You can Google how many cars in the world. You're gonna get different stories, by the way. It's not 100%. Nobody's actually counting. A lot of people are saying. But the last time I saw that figure is 1.2 billion cars. It had been growing over the last years. Okay, that's only cars. There's not trucks or other means of combustion, mechanical combustion. So these elements or these entities are going to move because they combust, and they combust fossil fuels, generally fossil fuels. Anymore, it's changing, but it will change slowly to the point where in the future we're not going to have that. But it will take. My guess will be 20 to 30 years. People are talking 2050 for that to happen. You'll be old when that happens, which is good, which is good. But in the future, your kids would hopefully not have that problem, so to speak. Okay, so the question is, how many people does a car amount to? In other words, a car breathes, a car combusts. A car in its normal usage, um, does it amount to one person or five persons or half a person? That has been not been calculated. Many years ago, I decided that this was a mechanical problem, and I engaged my friend, no one to mention names, mechanical engineer, to help me out. And he couldn't do it. I was a little bit disappointed. He says, well, you know, I'm a mechanical engineer, but that's not my subject. Why is it not his subject? Because this concept sits in the middle between mechanical engineering and biology. Right in the middle. So the biologists claim they don't know, and the mechanical engineers, they don't know. I mean, that happens all the time, by the way. I can tell you stories, a lot of stories about that. One day I wrote a paper that was right in the middle between groundwater and groundwater and what? And surface water, right. It was not surface water, and it was not groundwater. And boy, they turned me down. Because he went to a groundwater guy, he said, no good. He went to a surface water guy, he said, no good, not enough surface water, not enough groundwater. I was stuck and I never published. Fortunately, I have means of publishing on the web because I'm well recognized. So I published it on the web, and to heck with it, you know, that's it. But it was interesting the way it happened. We have been around, as you know very well, and a lot of things have happened to us. So that's why we're able to talk with experience. Okay, so we got, how many people does a car amount to? I didn't know. I asked my friend, mechanical engineer, he couldn't help. But again, I repeat for the nth time, Professor Ponce is a lucky man. And one day I ran into a publication of OAS that I was somehow putting my hands on. What's OAS? Organization of American States. The Organization of American States had done a lot of memoranda or publications on their business, on what they did it and so forth. I was employed by OAS three times actually through my career, and did a lot of work for them, hydrology. I had friends out there. I had visited them in Washington, and somehow I got a hold of these publications. So I picked up one and I was reading it. It was called something about the ecosystems. It's a very important publication. And I saw the way to calculate this thing. And I did it. I immediately did it. Long story made short, a car burns about 3 times as much oxygen, I'm sorry, as much organic matter as a human being. 3 times. So the population of the earth is not 8 billion, it's 30 billion. Because 32 billion to be precise, because you got cars breathing 3 times plus the suspects, one, so it's about 30 billion. There's a lot of people in the world, not just people that with 2 hands and 2 feet, but also those that have 4 tires. and they are breathing a whole lot. So I'm not going to go into here because it's too much, but I want you, if curious, to see how we did this calculation. How we did this calculation. World average of individual car usage. Number two, world average of gasoline mileage, 31 miles per gallon. You can check all these numbers on the web, by the way. Average density of gasoline, the world average consumption. This is very complex in terms of physics, but it gets into biology also, and that is where the problem is. Average person weighs 62 kilograms. We try to figure these numbers from the web. You can ask the web, what's the weight of the average person? Whatever that number means. I mean, how they calculate it, I don't know, but that's what's on the web, right? In summary, in terms of energy consumption, one car is equivalent to approximately 16.2 persons. But then it gets reduced to 3 by corrections. There's approximately 7.8 billion people, approximately more, because that's February 20. That's outdated, probably 8 billion by now. No, every year it adds 900, so it's 7.9 by now. Approximately 3,000 cars. The people in the world burn by 2,000 calories, so we're making equivalence of the calories in here, the kilocalories. The cars in the world burn the kilocalories, the total number of calories amount to 59. This is equivalent to, I'm not getting into the mathematics here. I mean, this is all algebra, as long as you understand the physics. Arithmetic, actually. The ratio between is this, so thus the current use of fossil fuels in car transportation amounts to an equivalent population which is about 3.7 times larger than the actual value in terms of energy consumption and subsequent release of carbon. In other words, if 8 is the population, 3.7 times 8 is about 30 million. So we got 30 million breathers in the world. Okay, so that's it's a hard fact. It's a hard issue to realize, but it is a fact. So finally, we have the last article in here. We got 13 minutes. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. For the past 120 years, humans have been engaged in a global experiment which has apparently upset the delicate balance of nature. Plants and animals were supposed to complement each other, yet humans have increased the number of animals, artificial animals, while reducing the number of plants. So deforestation and other types of development. This has led to anthropogenic global warming. The solution, although seemingly far-fetched, is to decrease the number of artificial animals while at the same time increasing the number of plants. But that's hard. It's extremely hard. Barring putting a halt to development, that's also extremely hard. Carbon sequestration appears to be the only way out of the problem. If we can pull out the carbon out of the air and hide it, that's the solution. That's the culprit. The carbon is the culprit. However, to do that, I personally don't believe it can be done effectively and efficiently. It's just defies comprehension how you can fix this artificially. So therefore, I believe I say in here, yet carbon sequestration remains a long way from being a practical solution to this intensely human predicament. So perhaps in the future, when I'm gone and you guys are gone, maybe somebody would come out and can do it. But right now, it cannot be done. Now, my friend Paolini, who used to be my system administrator many years ago, then he quit. He went on to bigger and better fields, as they say, was working on this carbon sequestration. So I showed him one time, I said, well, I don't think this can be done. And he says, you're wrong, Professor Ponce. I'm doing it right now. I said, oh, cool. Yeah, right. Show me. I mean, I didn't say show me, but it's hard to believe that we could move the carbon out of the air, use it, and then whatever remains left in there, put it back. That's hard to believe, okay? But I'm not a guy that is working in this area. So I'm gonna make exception in here. So photosynthesis began about 3 billion years ago. Respiration began about 0.6 billion years ago. We know that. Photosynthesis is carried out by green plants. Respiration is carried out by animals. So the respiration animals came in later. This plot that we got from the web, which is very interesting, it says that at the beginning, there was ammonia, there was no oxygen, there's ammonia and methane. So for animals to develop, you have to have a sufficient amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. So at the beginning, 2 billion, too small an amount, over here. And until it got to be 21%, which is over here right now, that's where we are comfortable with. Don't forget that oxygen allows us to live because of nitrogen is there trying to making sure that it doesn't explode. But 21% is a good number, and it's been a good number for a long time, meaning in human terms. But it has varied. I don't have any idea as to how the people that put this graph together did this graph over here, but the geologists know what they're talking. At least they think they know. I mean, there's sciences out there, people that spend their lives doing this, and this is what they have come up with. There was a drawback on the oxygen up to 11 or 13 and stuff. The dinosaurs died, I don't know, 68 million. Nobody knows how or why, or it may have been just a change in weather that killed all the. It may have been. I'm talking may have been. I don't know this stuff for a fact. But look at this: ammonia, methane, and we already know that water is optimum, better than any other competing substance like ammonia or methane or anything like that. So as soon as oxygen and nitrogen came in there, they were optimal for things to move out, for animals to develop. Animals started developing around 600, or around here somewhere. You see, the animals developed in there 600 million. 600 million, exactly, 600 million years ago. For the past 250 years, humans have been engaged in an experiment of global proportions by pursuing a type of development seemingly at odds with nature. In effect, by producing artificial animals, humans have been increasing the amount of respiration, while at the same time decreasing the amount of photosynthesis by eliminating a significant number of plants. The net effect is watming, meaning two negatives cause more negative. So, and then we plot the killing curve. Now, in here, this is a speculation that I did because I'm free to speculate. Anybody can be free to speculate. And we speculate with reason. Okay, we have here a photosynthesis and respiration are opposite processes. They both draw their inputs from the lower atmosphere, right? Photosynthesis gets the carbon dioxide, and respiration gets the oxygen. Okay, so they're both acting. Concentration, therefore, I say the concentration of inputs should roughly resemble the mass quantities, because at the beginning it was nothing. Now there's a volume and there's a flux. So should the flux be related to the volume? And the answer is kind of yes. Because where did it come from? It came from the mass. They're related. The flux related to the volume, remember. The flux is the flow, okay? So we say in here that the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide in the year 1900 was 724. There were 724 times more oxygen than carbon dioxide. And now we're going to compare that with the total floral biomass. It's difficult to estimate precisely. Boy, you can go in there and take a look at what Wikipedia says and so on and so forth. But we did it anyway. We figured out that the floral biomass is the mass of all the trees, all the vegetation around the world, estimated at 14 billion tons. And the final biomass, 2.5 billion tons. No, 1,400, or over 2, because you got 3 zeros. At any rate, the ratio is 560. That's the one we calculated without fudging the numbers or anything. And we figured that 724 was kind of related to 560. So it's 129. Don't forget that we could have missed in the numerator and in the denominator here. And in effect, these numbers could be the same, but they were not. We got to be fair in what we were doing. They were approximately the same, 30% difference. Now, we did the calculation for 2019, and we ended up with something different in here. So you can follow through in here that these are all speculations, granted, but they're good speculations. We're talking about physics, volumes, fluxes. We know how to do that. We're hydraulic engineers. So the solution, reduce the number of artificial animals. That's hard. Increase the number of plants to bring back the balance of nature. That's also hard. It can be done. We are now talking about that, but talking is one thing and doing it is another. So it'll take some time, I'd say maybe 1 generation for us to get really into this, okay? So that's basically what I was going to say. Yet humans have been doing exactly the opposite for the past 120 years. Why do I say 120 years? Because it was at the year 1903 that things took off. I already told you that. Henry Ford, he developed the assembly line and everybody was able to buy a car. The cars would cost 100,000 and now they cost only 20 or 10,000. Well, I mean, of monies of today, not of that time. It would have been different. I'm guessing. I'm not going to guess, but I'm sure you know that 100 years ago it was not that expensive. I wasn't there anyway. What I know is that I've been around for 50 years and I bought cars since I was 20. I bought like 30 cars or so in my career. And every time I go buy a new car, it costs a little more, like 10% more or something like this, right? So that's the fact, because things go up. You call it inflation, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, but that's a fact. Okay. Transportation based on fossil fuels is the culprit, while the paving of roads that facilitates transportation exacerbates. Paving produces permanent indirect artificial combustion. We created a term in that other paper, permanent way to reduce the uptake of carbon dioxide, therefore meaning more combustion of an indirect type. Feasible course appears to be carbon sequestration, depositing it somewhere out of sight. This would accomplish the same feat as humans somehow develop a way of producing artificial plants. So the opposite, right? Like, can you produce a plant? We have not. We have failed. We haven't done that. We so far have not been able to produce an artificial plant. There's scientists working in that regard, but it will be a long time before that actually happens. Okay, we still are waiting for life to do its own thing when it comes down to biology. I should take that with a grain of salt because people are doing, recombinant DNA, that kind of stuff. I am not familiar or knowledgeable enough on that subject to talk about it. All I'm saying that is going to, at this point, is that it's going to take a while for us to really mimic completely nature. At this point, we're not. We're not mimicking nature. So with that, I have 3 minutes. If you have any questions, I know that I kind of moved your thoughts and your analysis, but you can reread this and as many times as necessary. As a matter of fact, I have a video over here. I have a video which I am not going to show because it is 8 minutes and we only have 3 minutes. So that's it. Now, next week, we are going to start the subject of wastewater ecology. We have 1 week only and we have 14, so it's going to be speedy. 7 per session. We're going to be talking first about the Welch papers, which I believe is theory, very important theory of ecology and ecological hydrology, because Welch was oriented to do hydrology and ecology. That's why they hired him at University of Washington. He was not just an ecologist, because if you're just an ecologist, you don't know anything about water. I should mention to you at this point that I got the job to do the Pantanal because I was invited by the University of Mato Grosso in Brazil, with which I have friends out there because of the Pantanal work that I had done. I had some friends. And the biology department invited me to give a lecture on water. Not the civil engineers. The civil engineers thought they knew everything. But the biologists realized humbly that they didn't know water. So what are we going to do? We're going to hire somebody that really knows water to come and tell us what water is all about. So they hired me to go out there and give a 2-hour lecture on water to a group of 20 or 30 biologists. Why? Because I already told you, the middle field, the field in between 2 fields, it's not populated or has not been populated. People need to get in 1 foot in the biology and 1 foot in the hydrology in order to be ecological hydrologists or environmental hydrologists. And that's what we are wanting to do now. And that's good because society is going in that trend. Society wants to have people that can do 2 fields at the same time. The story of 1 person, 1 field is passé, it's old. They can solve in a very excellent way the wrong problem or the problem defined in the wrong way because they don't know, they have tunnel vision. So we should, in the future, stay away from hiring a specialist to do something that requires more thinking than a specialist.